Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of CILT and the GTA Disability Coalition, as the event MC, I'm thrilled to welcome all of you to have your say shape disability inclusion in Toronto's 2026 election. My name is David Myers. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a Black disabled man of Caribbean heritage and a Toronto settler. I have short salt and pepper hair. I'm wearing eyeglasses and a pink button-down shirt today. And I'm a senior manager of independent living programs at CILT. Shout out to all of you who've showed up today. Many of you disabled and deaf community members, partners, allies, and others. We all know there's much at stake for disabled and deaf residents in the municipal election this fall. And our community's priorities, as you know, are often left out of or deprioritized on election platforms. So with this town hall, we wanted to support voters like many of you in the room to have your say on platform priorities that matter to most of you in our community, whether it's action on disability poverty, food insecurity, inaccessible housing or transit, or any other issues that really matter to you. And we also wanted you to work together in breakout rooms with your allies, shaping election action calls that reflect a city for all that includes disabled and deaf people. And our priorities, action calls you have the right and the lived expertise to tell candidates to include on their platforms. Uh, we have a wonderful team of presenters for our gathering. I'm honored to name each of them in alphabetical order. They are Andrew Pulsifer, he, him, from TTCriders, Andrew Samis, she, her, from Toronto Elections, Mercedes Zaya Sharp, she, her, from Social Planning Toronto, Kim Adler, Coordinator, GTA Disability Coalition, Sean Kinsella, they, them, our guest opener for today, and Wendy Ports, our Executive Director at CILT. And I'd also like to shout out to all our event planning group members for their dedicated work on this event. A lot of heart and labor went into bringing this to us today. So shout out to everyone. And now, before we move into our program, I'm honored to introduce Sean Kinsella to open our election event and ground us in Indigenous justice. Sean, they, them, was most recently the director of Earth Fire at Centennial College in Toronto. They work in Indigenous education and teach a course on Two-Spirit politics at U of T. Sean's written several books, chapters on decolonizing higher education, and I'll leave Sean to further add anything else to their bio that they wish. But first, welcome and big wish, Sean.
That's everyone. Mikazirudem was a koni mashkiki nadishnakas, Gewa Saskote Kihuni Yakasun, and a Hiana Tia Timsama Committee Irish and Dow, Skeptagon Donjaba, Gay Donji, Gay Treaty 6 Ochinia, Gay Agueo and Dow, Gay Testoni and Dow. So my name is Sean or Kiki Kinsella. I am Cree, Soto, and Métis. My family comes from Treaty 6, Northern Ontario. I was born in Toronto and continue to live roughly an hour and 45 minutes east of Toronto. Um, and I was asked here to come and offer some acknowledgements and openings and sort of greetings around that sort of piece. Um, so uh, what I'm going to talk about a little bit is the concepts around indigeneity and disability, what it means to have inclusive communities. I'm going to talk a little bit about treaty responsibilities, and then also intersections of justice and how we can create these intersectional communities. Um, so one of the things that is important to acknowledge when we think about disability in particular, is looking at how our communities traditionally, historically dealt with disability, and thinking as well about how the Indigenous communities are so often now impacted by environmental issues that work to disable us within the colonial and white supremacist structures, and why, even though Indigenous folks may or may not identify as disabled specifically, that there is some important, I think, work to recognize both sort of like environmental justice issues and then recognizing how collectively we can look at that. When I think about disability in particular, I think about how we know through a lot of our sort of oral histories and stories that Indigenous people had a way of thinking about disability that's radically different to how it's thought about today, in the sense of everyone was included. So if someone had a particular gift, a particular way of thinking, or limitations, that those folks were provided for, and there was a place that was found for them within the context of community. And I think in particular of like neurostructure and neurodiversity, that those kinds of ways of thinking or being were considered a different perspective, and were an asset to the community. So if we think about as an example, if someone had a physical disability or a limitation, it might have meant that maybe they weren't going and hunting with a particular group or venturing as far from the community. But what does that mean if someone then has less mobility, so they're sitting in camp, right? Or they're more around our sort of like band or tribe or camp area? And what knowledge are they absorbing, right? Are they learning from the elders? Are they helping to watch kids? Like all of these different roles and responsibilities that can be found when you think of things as sort of a more inclusive way of thinking about it. Um, and I think that's radically different from the way that uh, settler society treats Indigenous people, as well as disabled folks who are more thought of this idea of being on the outside. So it's thinking about how do we move from that concept of being excluded or from the outside or where our issues are not deemed as important, to recognizing that everyone has a voice, everyone has a perspective that's really important. And we're in a particular time, I think, with the earth that all of those perspectives could not be more critical, right? We know that climate change is here, climate change exists, and the earth is changing. And I think a lot about how all those different perspectives and voices are so critical to creating solutions and creating a world that is more equitable for everybody. I also think about how climate change impacts Indigenous communities and disabled communities and marginalized communities so much more significantly as folks on the front line, right? So something that I think about that is like very sort of like top of mind around that is thinking about as an example, if there's folks who have disability who struggle with heat, as an example, and we know there is some work to limit, as an example, sort of have air conditioning or climate control issued within the context of a limitation around sort of heat in apartments or in other places. That's a fundamental sort of piece for justice, and is related to this concept of climate change, and that we also know that poverty intersects with all of these pieces as well because of who is historically excluded from workplaces because of capitalism, and this concept of who is able to be productive. And so these are the kinds of things that I think about when I think about this concept of how indigeneity and disability overlap. The other thing I think about when it comes to elections in particular is this concept of treaty. And so, for folks who may not be aware, Toronto falls under a couple of different treaty agreements, some that predate settler colonialism. Um, so, as an example, the dish with one spoon, or the one dish, one spoon treaty that was between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabeg nations. And this was a belt that recognized the fact that um, the territory was a shared territory. It was a territory that was meant to be used for hunting, and it was a territory that was meant for that bounty to be shared and for no one to take more than what was required for themselves within the context of this. And so that was an agreement that stands to this day. There are agreements and meetings and sort of pieces where there's a lot of work to look at this treaty, especially amongst Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations, and to try and talk about how do we do this in a present day context. The other thing I want to think about a lot is this idea of the one dish, one spoon, or Goswenta Tiro Wampum Belt treaty agreement. And so the Goswenta or the Tiro Wampum Belt was an agreement originally between the Haudenosaunee people and the Dutch. And that particular agreement was again about the concept of peace, friendship, and perpetuity, right? So this idea of it being forever. And so what does it mean to be at peace with one another? What does it mean to be in friendship with one another? Allyship is another way we think about that. And I think it's important to recognize that a lot of these wampum belts and agreements originally were within the context of what it meant to be military allies. So what does it mean to come when called? So when aid is needed, the expectation was that those nations would respond. And so that's something to think about in terms of when we think about allyship now. And then I also think it's important to recognize within the context of the dish with one spoon that if folks have seen that agreement, it's sort of this two rows of purple that are interspaced with these three rows of white. And each of those things have sort of symbolic meanings that I'll leave for Haudenosaunee folks to speak about more. But what I will say is that one of the things that's really important is to recognize that those two purple bands are what we describe as an ethic of non-interference. And so what that means is that our nations and the nation that became Canada, so the Canadian state, are not meant to interfere with each other, that we are supposed to respect each other in peace and friendship and in a perpetuity and forever, and not try and dominate one another. And so why that's really important when we recognize sort of this modern idea of treaty obligations is what does it mean for Indigenous folks, as an example, to participate in things like municipal elections, provincial elections, federal elections, when we have that ethic of governance within our own nations as well. However, and this is the thing with those two ships that are running side by side and are not meant to interfere with each other. Obviously, what one ship does has a tremendous difference on the other. And with Indigenous folks living in Toronto and living in those municipal areas, we are impacted by the decisions that people make around elections. We are impacted by the governments and that charge, even if we are not always the ones who are meant to be participating in some of those processes. And then the other challenge, of course, being that like Indigenous people are not a monolith, right? So some Indigenous folks are going to participate in politics in that way and vote, and some are not. And that's okay. That's part of this ethic of non-interference and recognizing our treaty balance. But the idea is still that we are supposed to be treating each other with peace and friendship and not interfering with one another. And so then for me, what it comes down to from an obligations perspective is how do you, if you're not Indigenous, think about your responsibilities of being involved in municipal elections and setting that sort of piece that is about equity, that is about relationships with Indigenous people, that is about advancing the fact that Indigenous folks often are embodying these marginalized identities. So for myself, identify as someone who's Two-Spirit, Indigenous, Crip, or disabled. All of these things are part of my lived experience. And so how do you make sure that folks like myself are being thought of, even if we're not necessarily the ones who are going to participate in democracy in that particular way and are more sometimes embodying our own governance systems and trying to lift those back up. And then finally, I think about the legacy of Elda Wanda Bon Whitebird, who did a lot of work with this organization, and this idea of what does it mean to work together to create better communities, better neighborhoods, better cities, and beyond. What do we do to create more sustained support for individuals within the context of both municipal, provincial, and federal politics, so that individuals are taken care of, so that they can help to build stronger communities. And so these are the kinds of intersections of justice that I think about a lot and is something for us to consider as a part of our collective work together when we look at both whether you want to talk about truth and reconciliation, whether you want to talk about treaty obligations, like all of these things are about how do we work together to address the actions of the past and create a better future together. So I am very grateful, and I say chi miigwech for the opportunity to open this today and to give some of those thoughts, and to the organizers for bringing me in. Miigwech.
Thanks so much, Sean. So a really warm Indigenous opening, really, and for your teachings on those intersections of indigeneity and disability. You made links with climate justice, poverty reduction, elections that we're talking about today, and the honoring of our treaties with Indigenous peoples, Indigenous nations, and what it means to do the shared work in allyship with Indigenous people. And I'm glad you referenced Ella Wanda Whitebird, who's beloved to us. So in the spirit of Ella Wanda Whitebird, we're here today doing this work together. So thanks a miigwech, Sean. Much appreciated. And before we jump into the meat of our event, I'm just going to share some agenda and access guidelines for today's session. So we already had a welcome and opening by Sean. I'll be reading the access and session format. We'll have a brief introduction to CILT and the GTADC. Then we'll have some presentations, first by Toronto elections. That'll be followed by a Q&A. And then Social Planning Toronto will be having their presentation. And then at that point, we'll have a 5-minute break. And then right after that, we jump into 3 presentations: housing, disability poverty, and transit. And then we'll have breakout rooms we mentioned earlier, and then a group report back and a calls to action discussion. Then a reflection and wrap up. And we'll be sharing content and resources post-event with everyone who registered. That's kind of our agenda. And right to the housekeeping items. We're grateful for live note-taking by Blue, ASL English interpretation by Francine and Joanne, and card captioning by Sarah. For captioning, you can toggle the captioning on and off using the Show Captions button in your meeting toolbar. We'll have a 5-minute break, like I said, throughout the session. If you need a break, please feel free to take a break. We want to center access at this event for sure. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking. If you'd like to speak during the Q&A, you can use either the chat or the raised hand button to speak. Also, if you need assistance during the event for any reason, you can send a private chat message to my coworker, Danielle Vinciguerra, or email her at danielle.vinciguerra, VINCEGUERRA @cilt.ca. We'll have the Q&A segment right after the Toronto elections presentation, and we'll have a wider plenary discussion when we come back from the breakout rooms in the second half of the event. Our breakout rooms will be for about 25 minutes. So lots of time to have a conversation in those rooms. We'll be recording the Zoom meeting, but we'll stop during the breakout rooms. And we'll have one breakout room designated for ASL users. Each room will have a facilitator and a note taker assigned. And after the breakout room period, we'll have a brief report back from each room. Lastly, we plan to co-create a caring, accessible space in which everyone will feel heard and respected. And we ask all of you to join us in ensuring a safe space for everyone. That's it for housekeeping, folks. And now, without further ado, it's a great pleasure to introduce my CILT colleague, Kim Adler, who coordinates the GTA Disability Coalition. CILT's going to share a brief summary of CILT and the coalition. Off to you, Kim.
Thanks, David. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. As David mentioned, I am the coordinator of the GTA Disability Coalition, where I have the immense privilege of working with 15 organizational partners who are committed to centering deaf and disabled voices across our communities. And I work alongside our dedicated CILT colleagues. a bit about me. I am a well into mid-age queer white settler person with health-related disabilities. I use she, they pronouns, and today I am wearing a blue short sleeve buttoned shirt, black frame glasses, and have deep purple color in short salt and pepper hair, which is held back by a gray bandana. Um, Next, I'll review what CILT and the GTADC are all about. So, rooted in the Nothing About Us Without Us disability rights movement, CILT is a community-based resource center run by people with disabilities for disabled folks. CILT programs include info and referral, a volunteer program, peer support, parenting with a disability, independent disability network, um, independent living skills training, attendant service application center, direct funding, and the coalition, GTADC. You can visit www.cilt.ca to learn more. Next slide, please. The GTADC is a cross-disability network of organizations that advances the rights, priorities, and voices of disability and deaf communities across the GTA. And it is convened by CILT and funded by United Way Greater Toronto. We primarily engage in municipal level advocacy while also supporting action on provincial and federal matters. Our priority areas include deeply affordable and accessible housing, disability poverty reduction, and accessible and affordable transit. You can visit our site at gtadc.ca to learn more and to sign up for our updates. We can stop sharing and get prepared for Andrea from Toronto Elections, who I'm very pleased to introduce. Andrea will talk a bit about accessibility in the city's elections. This section will include a Q&A if you have questions for Andrea after. We will then invite Mercedes from Social Planning Toronto, who will talk about the City for All platform and how we can utilize it to advance calls to the city and to candidates leading up to the October election. And as David mentioned, after Mercedes presents, we'll have a 5-minute break, and then we'll get into our core messaging on housing, disability, poverty, and transit before going into our break rooms. Over to you, Andrea.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen. Really appreciate being invited here today. Okay, can everyone see that? I'm going to try to. I think you're seeing everything there, right? Or are you just seeing the slide?
And your notes.
Yeah. Okay. So let me just.
You want to put it in presenter mode? There we go.
I thought it was in presenter mode. That's okay. I can just do it like this. Okay. So yes, thank you so much, everyone, for inviting me here today. I'm really pleased to be here. My name is Andrea, pronouns she, her, and I'm on the education and outreach team at Toronto Elections. I'm a white woman with brown chin length hair. I'm wearing a green shirt and I have blue glasses on today. I have a few different pairs, so today's my blue day. Just here today to provide a quick overview about the upcoming fall election, and I will also, of course, be highlighting accessible voting options and considerations throughout the presentation. So sort of high level, many of you may already know this. Toronto Elections manages the 4th largest municipal election in North America. It's the largest municipal election in Canada, and there are approximately 1.95, so almost 2 million eligible electors for a Toronto municipal election. And general municipal elections are held every 4 years. Toronto Elections is the branch of the city clerk's office within the City of Toronto that administers the municipal elections, and its role is to protect the fairness of the process, the confidentiality of each person's vote, and of course, ensuring the accessibility of the voting process as well. And on the screen is just a picture of the current Deputy City Clerk, Tobias Novogradsky. For the municipal election, again, I'm just going to quickly go over this, even though many of you probably know it. Toronto is divided into 25 wards. Where eligible voters will vote for the local city councillor to represent their ward at City Hall, along with a separate vote for mayor and school board trustee. And all members of City Council are independent. They're not affiliated with political parties. And these elected officials make up the Toronto City Council, which make choices that actively affect all of our lives, parks, libraries, transportation, emergency services, rec centers. And so this is, our opportunity to make those choices. And obviously that's some of the discussion that's going to be happening here today after is how we can get some of these items platformed with, even more strongly at City Hall, of course, some of the items that are important to the community here today. So who can vote? Who's eligible to vote to help elect the councillors and the mayor, 18 years of age or older, a Canadian citizen, and a resident of the municipality. We do have provisions, of course, for people who are non-residents who own or rent property in Toronto as well. And there are certain provisions, certain laws which would prevent somebody from also voting in a municipal election. But the first three there are sort of the most important criteria. So this fall, obviously there's a number of times in terms of voting. So election day is October 26th. But if somebody can't make it on election day, there is advanced voting as well. So advanced voting times are going to be October 6th to October 11th. And then there's 2 advanced voting locations per ward that are open during advanced voting. And we also have a mail-in voting program at the City of Toronto. And that's obviously open to anybody who wishes to vote by mail. And I'm just going to move to the next slide and talk a little bit more specifically about that. So this was introduced in 2022 citywide. So it's actually hasn't been available in Toronto for all that long, but now is really an integral part of the options to vote within a municipal election. It provides obviously flexibility for people to vote from home for lots and lots of reasons. And we see each election an uptake in this option. So for this upcoming election, the applications for mail-in voting will be open September 1st to September 24th. And that can be done online, and it can also be done through the telephone. There'll be folks who are available to support people over the phone to set up their application as well. And once they're approved, a mail-in voting package gets sent to that voter. They fill it in, and there's clear instructions that come in that package, and then they can return it through Canada Post box. Postage is, of course, included, or there's some yellow Toronto Elections drop boxes around the city that kind of look like mailboxes, but are branded with the election branding, and the packages can be dropped in those boxes as well. I just want to highlight that we also offer a Braille mail-in voting package. So the entire package is also in Braille, and people can request that when they apply for mail-in voting. I also just want to flag that there is another option for folks who choose not to or cannot attend a voting place in person, then that is proxy voting, and that's an option for somebody can allow another eligible elector, they can authorize them essentially to vote on their behalf. And there's a process to go through for that as well. That process is available right up to election day. So there is a time frame for mail-in voting, and you can see there the applications between September 1st and 24th, and then the package by October 14th. But proxy voting does remain open through election day. So I just want to talk a little bit about some of the accessible voting, or just the general, the voting supports that are there for folks who are voting in person. So we do offer something called curbside voting. So if someone is physically unable to go inside the voting place for any reason, we can actually have the staff come outside to either their car or to the front outside of the voting place, or somewhere within the voting place building, that we can kind of facilitate the vote for somebody like that as well. So we call that curbside voting, and somebody can either we can coordinate that in advance or even on the spot if necessary. Um, generally people know that they can kind of bring folks to support them as they go to vote. But when we talk to people, we realize not everybody actually knows that those folks who come to support with the permission, of course, of the voter, because voting is private, those support folks can actually take an oath and support behind the voting screen. So if a voter wishes to bring somebody behind the voting screen, whether that's for support to mark the ballot or to understand the ballot or for translation, whatever the purpose might be, they do have that right, and that individual, the support individual, can take an oath and provide that support behind the voting screen. And any election official who's at the voting place is also empowered to do that. So somebody can request that support if they would like. There's also some other, materials at the voting place. There's, how to vote in a variety of languages, including Braille. There's magnifiers. There's pads and pens to facilitate communication if that's something that somebody might need. And for the first time this year, we're also offering Braille ballot overlays at all of the voting place locations, or all of the voting places. On the screen here, just talking a little bit about the voter assist terminal. So there's a picture of this machine. Some of you might already know about it, or have used something like this in a provincial or federal election, or perhaps in the municipal election. So we call this the voter assist terminal, or VAT for short. It's a way to mark the ballot. It's not counting the ballot, but it's a device that has a variety of tools that can help somebody mark the ballot independently. So there's a touch screen, there's a braille keypad, there's a rocker pedal, a sip puff tube. It has audio functions with a headphone. So there's a variety of ways that somebody could mark the ballot. And wherever there is a voter assist terminal, there is a trained election official with that terminal who can provide direct support. So VATs are available at every advanced vote location. So if you're voting between October 6th and October 11th, there is one at every location, and they remain at those locations on election day. So there isn't one at every location on election day. However, if your voting location on election day does not have a VAT, we can facilitate a ballot transfer so that you can use a location that does have one, should you choose to use one. I also just want to quickly touch on voting places themselves in relation to sort of the physical accessibility of those locations. I know there's, lots of questions, and sometimes very real issues that happen due to some of the locations. So there are about 1,400 locations and voting locations in a municipal election on election day. And they all do go through a multi-step inspection process, looking at a variety of items, but not limited to, things like route of travel, both inside and outside, and the length of travel, for example, as well, up to a voting place. They're looking at access doors. They're looking at whether there's level access, lighting, temperature, and of course, identifying where modifications might be needed for voting. And the team is also considering things like signage for each location to help voters, identify the voting place, both from the inside and the outside. We also hire over 10,000 people to work in the voting places for the municipal election and to administer the election. And those staff receive, accessible customer service training. They're aware of the accessible voting options, and they receive training on, creating that inclusive workspace or the inclusive voting place, environment. And this year that training was revamped and some of the pieces were reviewed by some of our community partners to make sure that the content that folks are being trained on was up to date and relevant and inclusive. I just wanted to quickly touch on where someone can find more information about their ward and their candidates. So at Toronto Elections, we register candidates. We provide our candidates team provides support and information during that election cycle. But we are, of course, quite removed from the campaigning side. But if you are looking for candidate information, obviously first you'd want to know your ward. The City of Toronto does have a Find Your Ward tool on the website. A 311 staff can always help with that as well. So that's obviously a great quick resource as well. But once you do know that, you can go onto the Toronto Elections site, and it does list all of the candidates. You can filter by your ward. You can see all the mayoral candidates. You can see the school board trustee candidates. Candidate registration closes tomorrow, so the list right now is probably relatively complete. When candidates do register, they have the option of putting their contact information that we can upload to our site. So if you are going on our site to look for candidates, you can expand and you can see contact information, but it's optional and not all candidates give it to us. So we will put the contact information for candidates that give it to us, but we don't have contact information or websites, for example, if a candidate doesn't provide it to us. Of course, we always suggest using official or sources that you trust for any kind of information that you're getting to compare candidates and to look at platforms and things like that. Obviously, large and local community organizations often host candidate debates, and so that's another way to learn more. And I believe that the Toronto Public Library is also bringing back a tool that they use for elections called Know Your Vote. So we've covered sort of the when and the hows, and I just want to highlight the toronto.ca/elections. So right now you can find lots of information on the website, but as of September 1st, that's when the My Vote tool kind of opens up on the website, and you can search by address, and you can find out kind of all the information that you need based on your address. You can check if you're on the voters list. You can add yourself, or you can update the voters list. You can find your voting places. You can check if the accessibility features of the voting place. You can see the candidate list. You can see a sample ballot actually in the way that it's laid out. So if you want to prepare yourself to sort of what that looks like, or you're helping somebody to prepare, you can actually see that. You could apply for mail-in voting or proxy voting. You can see that list of acceptable ID. There's lots of things that you'll be able to do as of September 1st. And obviously, if you have any questions and want to talk to somebody directly, you can always call 311. They're sort of that first point of contact for elections, and anything else, any additional questions, they can always escalate to Toronto Elections directly. Okay, so finally, I just have some information here on the screen about contacting us. Our main key message, especially now in a time of sometimes some mis and disinformation about elections, unfortunately, is that we want people to use our website as sort of the trusted source for election or voting information. Obviously, the whole, the candidates and platform piece, that's separate. But for the logistics of the vote itself, we want people to use our site as a trusted source of information. And then 311, of course, for phone calls. I do want to note, though, on the screen there, we also have contact information that is specifically around any questions around accessibility, or if somebody requires a little bit of extra support or perhaps isn't aware of all of their voting options. We do have a team at Toronto Elections directly who kind of support this phone and email to provide that more sort of thoughtful and personalized service to folks who might need it. So that's a resource for you as well. So that's a really quick presentation. I don't know if there's that time for the Q&A, but happy to try to take some questions. If I can't answer them, I will definitely get back to whoever I need to.
Thanks, Andrea. Appreciate that. Yeah, that was an amazing shorter presentation from your hour-long one that I attended. So good job. Thank you very much. We've got a question from John Massa. I have a question too, so I'll go after. John, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. The question is if, I don't know if it's a two-part question or not, if someone is homeless and the other is if they're in a hospital, I don't know if they're the same or separate. What does someone with a disability do that doesn't
So,
have necessarily a fixed address
mhm.
or in hospital?
So, for somebody without a fixed address, we have somebody can use the address that they have um, stayed at or slept at for the past 5 weeks as an address to vote. And when they come to that voting place, they can take a declaration. So somebody does not have to um, have the ID that shows that they have been at that location. So we do have a very, I think it's a relatively robust uh, or process for folks who don't have a fixed address. We also have a shelter package that we work on, and we work with shelters around the city to provide them with lots of information about the process, how they can support the folks that they work with. We also provide shelters and drop-ins in the city with a template letter that somebody who uses that shelter or drop-in can use that has their address. They can use that address for the purposes of voting. And this year, I believe we're also working with the folks who reach out to encampments to provide that information as well. So there's also information about voters without a fixed address on the website as well. So we do have a process to support that. In terms of hospitals, I wish I had my voting place colleagues with me because I feel like I might misspeak a little bit, but I can definitely kind of get a more fulsome answer. But there is a process to have voting locations in long-term care and retirement residents. And I believe as well in some hospitals, but I would need to get back to you to get some clarity around that specifically. I'm going to make a note of that.
Thanks, Andrea. We just have two mentions in the chat that I'll flag. One of our attendees has indicated that there's actually an additional accessible voting option, and that is to set up an appointment by webcam. I'm not sure if you've read that comment, that they were able to do sort of more recently. And do you know much about that?
I actually don't know what that's referring to. I wonder if that was for a provincial by-election or a provincial election or a federal by-election. I don't know if let me see if I can see the comment. What was being done by webcam? Was it
Asia has her hand up so she can explain.
okay?
We just have a couple more minutes and we'll move over to Mercedes, but we can connect with you after and follow up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Asia?
Oh, hi everyone. So I can answer that question. I was the person who was able to do that. So
Okay.
it's for municipal, provincial, and federal. And unfortunately, it isn't something that is universally known by all staff members. I have made that request for them to make that universally known. But one way I would recommend is to bring that feedback back to them, because it is a possibility. It's essentially just emailing your local voting official and explaining to them the accommodation that you require for this. And if you are homebound and you experience barriers to mail in and other in-person options, that is an accommodation that has precedent for a number of years now. But yeah, it exists, and I'm happy to help with that if they need confirmation.
So, Asia, I'm happy to maybe we can connect after to get a little bit more detail.
Sure.
You can. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And just one more note in the chat. So for voters who don't read English, they might be able to speak, but reading may be a problem. So will there be folks who can assist with that or set
So
something
we,
like that up in advance, maybe that kind of support?
yeah, I mean, I know, so definitely, there are with 311, they can translate into about 180 languages. I think there's like certain ones they can do on the spot, and then others that you can connect with to make that plan. So that would be one potential option, is that you could kind of connect with them and have that translation a little bit kind of in that moment. But of course, you can always bring somebody. So if somebody is working with, sorry, if somebody is, brings a family member with them, they could be happy to, that they can provide perhaps that translation. We know that that happens a lot, right? People bring in family members. We also, I know that our recruitment team is trying to identify what languages the staff speak and then put them in locations where there might be larger populations of folks who speak that language across the city. So that's sort of one thing that I know our recruitment team has been looking at. And I believe this year the staff are going to have stickers that says, I speak. So it'll actually list the languages that they speak directly. So when somebody comes in, they can see if somebody at the location speaks their language.
Right, thank you. And just one question, last question that I have quickly. Will there be people stationed outside if folks need to reach someone for curbside voting? So they're easily found?
Yeah, so a
So
number,
then the person doesn't actually have to go in.
yeah, no, I recognize. So a number of the locations have what we call access officers, and those would be most likely outside, but they're typically stationed where there would have been, as the voting place team might have identified, a door or a barrier where there might be somebody needed to provide some extra support. So whether it's a door that doesn't have a push button or something like that. So there's not necessarily at every location somebody outside. That's why we're really trying to get the word out about kind of curbside and all of these things so people can kind of have these plans a little bit in advance. I I think there's possibly going to be signs outside that may have the phone number, like those lawn signs as well, that have a phone number that folks can call. So to answer your question, partially. At some locations, I believe there will be somebody outside, and at some, I don't think there is anybody outside.
Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, I think we're ready to pass it over to Mercedes. Mercedes, how are you doing?
Doing good, thanks. How are you doing?
Good.
Bring
Okay,
it on, Mercedes. Bring it on.
I'm just gonna pass it right over to you, and you can give your more fulsome introduction.
Beautiful. Thanks so much. All right, so I'm gonna try my best to figure out sharing my screen. While I'm doing so, oh, I do need sharing request here. So I'll send the request in. While waiting for that, I'll just quickly share that my name is Mercedes. I use she, her pronouns. I am the project manager of community wealth building at Social Planning Toronto. I am a mixed race woman. I am white and Salvadoran or mestizo in terms of both my sides of my family. And I'm currently have brown curly hair, wearing a black shirt, and have a little silver cowboy necklace, rooting me in my roots in the prairies. I believe I have sharing status now, so I will try and open this up here. Beautiful. Okay. So what I'm here to talk about now is a platform that many folks on this call have actually helped inform, called the City for All platform. This is really a collective call for change, a vision that people have for what can be achieved by 2030 in the city of Toronto. And it's helping us build up towards the municipal election. So a big question in terms of why we are calling for a city for all is, number one, recognizing that during these election times, we are often approached by candidates across the city who are running for their own campaigns, their own visions of what Toronto should be. But oftentimes we don't really have the opportunity to come together and determine collectively what communities and what different organizations want to see happening in the city. Really, we understand that many of us deserve to thrive in the city, but so many of us continue to struggle. We are faced by so many different intersecting crises, whether it be around housing, health, poverty, safety, and climate. So we really want to be able to understand what it means to change those and recognize that a lot of the issues we face in Toronto are rooted in our policies, and that if we can change those and change how we resource our city, we could actually all be able to live a better life. It's also really important to do this work because of the state of crises that people are facing. Social Planning Toronto recently put out a child and family poverty report card that found that 1 in 4 children are currently living in poverty in the city of Toronto. There is currently a map on the slide that we're sharing here that shares different wards and census tracts according to different shades. So the darker blue shades recognizes a deeper concentration of poverty, and the lighter shades are representing lower rates of poverty. And you can really see how that is actually geographically concentrated, especially in the inner suburbs in the northwest and northeast of Toronto. And that really shows how much we really need to see investments in services and supports that can support people's lives in those areas. And we know that also these rates are disproportionate when it comes to people who are Indigenous, racialized, immigrants, especially newcomer families. So trying to think of ways to support. So as mentioned, we really need and deserve better, and it's actually important to recognize that the solutions for changing all of this is possible. It is within our power. So actually back in 2022, a coalition of community groups also came together and built out the first City for All platform. This was actually based on 9 core pillars, looking at issues like racial, gender, and disability justice, poverty and food insecurity, democratic processes, housing and affordability, community safety, jobs and community wealth, community services and space, transit and connections, and climate and green neighborhoods. So this platform is not just something we built up in advance of the election. It's also something that we tried to activate in the 4 years since that happened, as well as after the 2023 mayoral by-election. And it's important to recognize that there have been some really significant wins. We have seen really strong investments when it comes to tenant supports, when it comes to things like, fare freeze, when it comes to things like looking at greater investments in universal student food program, so many more that we could cite here. But also at the same time, it's not enough. And even when we have these wins, people don't necessarily feel that with regards to their material conditions. So we need to continue to push for more. So for this 2026 platform, we have tried our best to also take the 2022 platform, learn from the wins, and also try to make it a bit more accessible and a bit more digestible. So for the new platform, we actually cut down to 6 core pillars. These are housing for all, affordability for all, economy for all, transit for all, well-being for all, as well as climate for all. We'll go deeper into those in a second. We also root this platform in a series of principles that we think should be upheld across any decision that's made at the City of Toronto. Number 1, rooting all decisions within the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations, and making sure that the city is being accountable to its relations with Indigenous communities here. That we are upholding racial, gender, disability, and migrant justice within our decisions at City Hall. That the city is committing to open and democratic processes, and that we are also committing to public and community ownership when it comes to how we contract out our services. Oftentimes they tend to be privatized, and we want to see that held more within public and community control. We also have some ideas about how we can resource these big visions. One includes reallocating the police budget to public services. We know that police budget continues to rise uninterrupted, and we believe that if we could invest more into preventative mechanisms for addressing issues of crime or of different issues that are coming forward that are really a result oftentimes of poverty and injustice, we can actually see greater good happen in the city. We also look at different ways of taxing those who hold a lot of wealth. So whether that be things like the vacant home tax and luxury home tax, seeing those expand, things like making big oil, big box stores, and large shopping malls pay their fair share, as well as corporate landlords. Fighting for a New Deal in Toronto. So this basically means building a renewed agreement with the province and with the federal governments to be able to continue to invest in the city of Toronto. And finally, expanding municipally owned enterprises. So some of you might have heard, for example, of this idea of the public grocer model. That could be a revenue generating stream to help invest further into food security programs. So those kinds of ideas are what's behind this platform. I'm going to briefly go through some of the big visions here and also really hone in on at least one of the key areas that are really tied to disability justice and accessibility when it comes to thinking about our city. So the vision for Housing for All is that the city must uphold the right to housing as well as reduce the housing waitlist by building and protecting affordable, accessible, and well-maintained homes. And so as you can see, there are about 6 different pieces we put forward here. I really want to hone in on the one around ensuring that the city continues to build affordable and accessible housing and shelters. So the city has actually already committed to creating a number of new homes. This includes 65,000 rent-controlled homes, as well as 18,000 supportive housing units by 2030. The city is underway towards these commitments, but there's still a long ways to go to actually achieve those targets. And we know it's also still not enough when it comes to the housing crisis we're facing. The city has also committed to creating 20 new shelter developments with over 1,600 shelter beds by 2033. So we want to see the city continue to maintain these targets, if not exceed them, to actually address the crisis that we are facing. We want to make sure that they ensure that these are accessible homes, that they commit to some of the recent changes at City Hall around universal design and making sure that there are barrier-free access units available in new housing, likewise with shelters. We want to make sure that they also make the data available. This is something that CILT will be speaking about shortly. And then also making sure that there are dedicated units for people who are feeling the brunt of the housing crisis, whether that be Black and Indigenous renters facing housing insecurity, people with disabilities, as well as women and gender diverse people fleeing intimate partner violence. So you can see all of the other pieces here around continuing to expand affordable housing, cracking down on bad landlords, protecting tenants, protecting unhoused communities, and combating neighborhood displacement. I'm going to move on to affordability for all. Under this, we recognize that the city has to lower the cost of living by deepening investments to support access to affordable food, childcare, and community services. So I really want to hone in on the piece around increasing free and accessible community services. Here, we really want to see the expansion of access to free city-run programming, especially in neighborhoods with higher levels of poverty. We want to continue to see subsidies with recreation fees when it comes to programs like the Welcome Policy. We also want to be able to see the expansion of supports for people regardless of their status within the city, so including people who are undocumented across Toronto. As mentioned, affordability for all also touches on things like expanding affordable childcare, upholding the right to food, improving year-round access to public spaces, funding Indigenous community organizations, and also making arts and culture affordable across the city. When it comes to economy for all, we believe that the city has to tackle wealth inequality.
Shady,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Would you mind slowing down a little bit between points and slides, just for our interpreters?
Definitely. Sorry about that. I can be a fast talker, so I'll make sure to slow down. I was also mindful of the 10-minute, maybe hitting the time. So if you notice I'm getting close, please just let me know.
Yeah, I think you're getting a bit close too. So just to mention that the Mercedes and all the presenters, we're including the slides in our resource pack, just so everyone knows.
Awesome. So I'll go slower and I'll also maybe cut down my descriptions of some of the key areas. So thanks for that. So we think that the city, as one of the biggest employers in the city of Toronto, has a big role to play in terms of tackling wealth inequality. So some of the key ways to achieve this vision include committing to decent work and living wages, supporting inclusive access to city jobs and contracts. One of the pieces under that call is expanding opportunities for equitable employment and targeted hiring, especially for people with disabilities across the city. And this is part of their Disability Inclusion Access Plan. Making sure that development actually benefits communities, investing in and hiring youth, building community wealth, and then finally protecting affordable commercial spaces. I'll move on to the next one, which is around transit for all. We are going to hear shortly from TTCriders about their work here. But we believe that the city must maintain control of the TTC to expand faster, reliable, accessible, and affordable transit. So in terms of how to achieve that vision, we think that Toronto has to control its own transit system. Some of you may or may not have heard that the province is currently aiming to take control over some of the authority when it comes to how our transit is run. We want to make sure that transit is affordable through things like maintaining fare capping and fare pass. We want transit to be faster and reliable. And importantly, we really want it to be accessible. So this includes things like expanding access to Wheel-Trans with more flexible pickup times, expediting elevators and transit stations, which were supposed to be completed, if I'm not mistaken, by this year, and improving accessible wayfinding and accessible bus shelters. And then finally, making transit safer through non-police interventions and creating more social supports on the transit system. When it comes to well-being for all, the vision is to take new approaches to keep communities safe by expanding alternatives to policing and advancing health equity. So we want to make Toronto a city where people can be healthy by investing in public health, to be able to respond to mental health crises without the police. So really expanding in programs like the Toronto Community Crisis Service. And also continuing to do things like funding harm reduction services, protecting the right to protest, supporting community-led violence prevention and intervention, and advancing many of these different strategies that the city creates around equity and reconciliation, but doesn't always fund. Last but not least, climate for all. So the city must protect Toronto's neighborhoods from climate emergencies and reduce emissions in our homes, energy, transportation, and waste. So ways to achieve this vision include making sure that homes are climate safe. Our homes and our buildings tend to be one of the biggest emitters and polluters in Toronto. So lots of opportunities for things like creating new standards on building emissions and access to things like air conditioning units to make sure we can all live and be safe in our homes. Protecting people from extreme weather. This applies to everything from flood-prone neighborhoods and making sure that spaces are protected, creating the greater access to clean air spaces network, especially when things like wildfire smoke hits our city, speeding up snow removal and ice removal from our streets. Also having things like accessible evacuation plans like stairlifts and backup generators, and a number of other initiatives to really be able to respond to moments when our climate crisis hits. Some of the other pieces under Climate for All include creating a green job strategy, funding neighbors, helping neighbors, because usually those are the first people to respond when an emergency happens. Improving waste services in our communities, and then preventing development that contributes to pollution. This includes things like the recent increase in AI data centers being proposed for the city, as well as things like the potential expansion of Billy Bishop Airport, which for now has been stalled but may still move forward. So continuing up those fights. So sorry for speeding through those. It's a lot of things we need to change across the city. There have been a number of different groups that have helped contribute to this. We hope you can keep it moving forward. I'll just quickly close by saying we are shortly going to be launching a new website that includes all of this information at cityforall.ca. We're still editing it, but technically you could take a sneak peek at it to see what it's like. There have been some very beautiful visuals created here of cityscapes and different individuals kind of pushing forward these new visions. So encourage you to check it out when it's live. And thank you so much, CILT, for the opportunity to chat today and for everyone who contributed to the platform.
Thank you, Mercedes. David, did you want to move us to break? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, thanks, Mercedes. For folks in the room, Social Plan Toronto has been an awesome partner during this campaign, elevating accessibility and our community's rights and needs in the City for All platform. So shout out for that. It's really wonderful to partner with you folks. And we're going to break at this point. We promised a 5-minute break between the first session and second. So I'm going to ask people to take a break for 5 minutes and get your bio break help, or whatever you need in your 5 minutes. And please come back to see us afterwards. We'll be going right into 3 presentations starting with housing when we get back. So look forward to that. And go take your break.
Yeah, and come back at 2:16. We'll be back on
2:16.
and we'll
2:16.
be moving right back into it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. And we're trying to, we're trying to make up some time. So we will be going right into our presentation on housing with Wendy Porch, CILT's Executive Director, who will start off our three back-to-back presentations. So Wendy, off to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm thrilled to be here and so happy to see everybody connecting on what can we do to support our community in this next election. I think that there are some slides to be shared for this section. So could we get the slides up? In the meantime, I am Wendy Porch. I'm the Executive Director here at CILT. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white, cisgendered woman with a disability. And this work is important, I think. It's important to me. It's important to everybody in the room. So I'm so happy you could be here. Thank you for putting the slides up. I think that the intention of the next few presentations is to deepen our understanding of some critical issues for our community and to stimulate some discussion in the breakout rooms and also to help everybody think about, if you're going to go to your candidate in this election and ask some questions and raise issues relevant to the community, what are they and what could you be talking about? So it is my pleasure to have been invited to talk a bit about housing. Housing is a critical issue for our community. As an independent living center, if you cannot live in the community, you cannot live independently, right? If there's nowhere for you to live, how can you live independently? So it's, a core issue for us. So I want to talk through a few things just to think about in the context of how we might be framing housing if you're talking to candidates or you want to talk to other folks in the community about this. Accessible and deeply affordable housing is critical. We know that disabled people are 4 times more likely than non-disabled people to experience homelessness. And we have a link here to the Canadian Human Rights Commission's report monitoring housing outcomes for disabled people. And they came up with a framework that looked at a number of different issues related to housing and disabled people in Canada. And it's notable because it's the first framework of its kind. And I would suggest, if this is a topic close to your heart, that you check out this resource. We also know that demand for accessible housing in Canada far, far exceeds the availability of accessible housing. From the same report, less than 1 in 10 publicly owned social and affordable housing units in Canada is accessible. Less than 1 in 10. It was around 8% the last time this survey was done in 2020, which is astonishing. We also know that the city is in a position to be able to build accessible housing. Out of work that we did with the Accessible Housing Network and the Accessible Housing Working Group with the City of Toronto, in October 2024, there was a motion passed. And I can put the name of the motion in the chat afterwards so you can look it up. But essentially, what the motion said, and City Council approved it, was that the city should be working towards increasing the amount of accessible and affordable housing. And two of the actions that the city is supposed to be undertaking include working towards a new set of universal design standards and also a new standard for barrier-free units. But as a member of the Accessible Housing Working Group, both myself and David attend those meetings. We can tell you that that work has largely stalled. I think we were contacted once in March of this year, and we have not been reconvened. So this is something concrete that you can talk to mayoral candidates or councillor candidates about, is what's happening with this work around developing these new standards. We also know that affordable rental housing using market rent levels is out of reach for disabled residents who are experiencing poverty. We know that when the city applies a standard of affordable, that they're not talking about deeply affordable, which is what is needed for disabled people. We hear frequently from disabled people that they are in inexpensive housing, that as a result of that and living in poverty, that they are giving up on things like days that they eat, being able to afford to live in residences that are not dealing with pest issues, for example. So there's a lot of issues that really intersect here around affordable housing. So next slide, please, for me. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so some of the things that also came out of that work that we did with the Accessible Housing Working Group, that same motion called on the City of Toronto to address the province formally again to improve the adequacy and the structure of ODSP and Ontario Works. We all know that these are wholly insufficient for anybody living on them to be able to live with any kind of dignity. Many people with disabilities live in extreme poverty as a result. So this was an action that was in that motion. You can talk to the candidates about whether or not they support the city going back and saying to the province this needs to be improved, and really asking them if the city is going to be accountable to the motion that it itself approved. Prioritizing disabled, Indigenous, Black, and 2S LGBTQ plus people waiting for accessible and deeply affordable rental homes. We know that intersectionality means that many of our community members face a multitude of additional barriers to accessing accessible and affordable rental homes. So they must be prioritized, and you should be talking to your candidates about how they are going to do that. Tenant supports must be increased across disability communities, developing affordable barrier-free units, and making sure that they're allocated to people who need them. Part of what we discovered in the work that we were doing with the Accessible Housing Working Group is that the city, in fact, does not have an up-to-date inventory of what accessible units it owns and whether or not there are disabled people living in those units. We have to have an understanding of that. If there is to be any prioritization of those units, to people with disabilities who have need of those units. Currently, we don't have an up-to-date inventory at all. Next slide for me, please. Okay, and folks have asked me to talk a little bit about accessible shelters. So I sit on the city's Shelter and Housing Advisory Committee. And this has been an issue that I have really been very concerned about for some time. The last audit that I've seen of how accessible the city shelters are was from 2018. It demonstrated that none of the city's shelters met all 8 of the criteria that they were using to assess accessibility, and most of them met none of the criteria. I understand that the city has undertaken a more recent audit of 71 city shelters. I learned this just recently, but I have not seen the results of that audit. So you could be asking your candidates if they have seen that. Are they committed to building accessible shelters? We believe that the city must commit to 100% of new shelter spaces being designed with universal design. Currently, the plan is for 20% of shelters to be designed with disabled people in mind. And this is particular people are more likely to be involved in relationships that involve gender-based violence. If people are looking for somewhere safe to go, disabled people are going to be very challenged to find somewhere in the current shelter system. So asking for commitments on this is definitely something that you could do. The next slide for me, please. Okay, and finally, and I'll just speed up because I know that we have a lot to talk about. There is a huge data gap related to the city's reporting platforms. It is very hard, again, because we don't know whether disabled people are in city-funded housing. We don't know how many accessible units we have. We don't know if people are being matched adequately. We don't even know how many quit housing circumstances.
Sorry, Wendy, it's the interpreter. You froze a bit there, so I missed a bit.
Oh, okay. So we don't even know how many people in the city of Toronto who are disabled. Am I completely frozen?
You're cutting in and out.
Cutting in and out. My apologies, folks. I'll just wrap it up and say there is a huge data gap here. You should be talking to your candidates about supporting the renewal of the Housing Rights Advocacy Committee. This is a committee that is here to support access to housing for people who really have been largely marginalized around this issue. And we think that they should be empowered to do more effective work, in fact. So that's it for me. I hope that that covers everything, Kim and David, that you were hoping that I could cover. I don't want to take up too much more time, so I will discuss this more in the breakout rooms.
Thanks so much, Wendy. Great overview for us and feedback for folks to go after their candidates on. Next up is Kim presenting on the key drivers of disability poverty in Toronto and sharing some policy actions the city can take to tackle them. So off to you, Kim.
Thanks, everyone. And I'll try to reduce my time a bit too. So disability poverty levels are have been on the rise for quite some time, with twice as many disabled folks living in poverty compared to non-disabled folks. So we've got a source there, Disability Without Poverty, their recent publication or just last year. Yet Toronto's poverty reduction strategy, also known as PRS, underinvests in city services disabled residents depend on. Tenant support programs are one. This past year, there were increases to Rent Bank, Epic, and Mira, but the city still doesn't have dedicated PRS spending directed at reducing the impacts of disability poverty. So we very much join City for All's calls to increase investments in Rent Bank, Epic, and Mira to address rising unmet need. Next slide, please. Other gaps include the lack of specific accessible housing targets, goals, ratios, including tracking and published data across PRS platforms. And we've also we've called on the city to be an active advocate for increasing provincial and federal income support programs such as ODSP and the Canada Disability Benefit, which ended up being far too low. And these programs can lift disabled people out of legislated poverty, but they are not currently. Just to mention, the city is a significant employer, and while there is an employment equity policy that includes disabled folks, there, as Mercedes mentioned, the city is still lacking kind of a directed strategy and outreach to sort of center disability inclusive employment and training opportunities within the municipal government and other sectors. So we'd like to see movement there. And I think I'll just wrap it up, but just key to know, throughout all of our presentations, that disability exclusion, disability poverty is a public sector policy choice. So, we could certainly make some different choices and our communities wouldn't be struggling so much in poverty, lack of housing, etc. So I'll just leave it there for my piece, and we'll pass it along over now to Andrew to chat about transit.
Hi, everybody. Let me just share my screen. My name is Andrew Pulsifer. I'm the Executive Director of TTCriders, a membership-based transit advocacy organization. I'm a white cisgendered male with curly salt and pepper hair, round glasses with dark frames. I'm wearing a headset microphone, and I have a collared button-up shirt that is blue with white stripes. Folks can see my screen, I hope. I'll try to be brief with this as well because I know we're a bit behind time. So TTCriders, as I said, is a membership-based transit advocacy organization based out of Toronto. We run campaigns to make transit more affordable, accessible, and reliable for all. Accessibility is a top concern for our organization, with an active and vibrant accessibility committee meeting on a monthly basis to talk about concerns around access on transit. We have a vision to make sure that transit riders have a voice when approaching decision makers, that we are seen as a constituency that cannot be ignored. There's often a view that Toronto is quite car centric, and people don't want to anger car drivers. We want them to not anger transit riders when they make decisions. We've been very active on campaigning on several things over the last 4 years, and we have several very significant wins that now need to be expanded. And our belief is that these are wins that affect people of all access needs. That transit, reliable, affordable, accessible, and safe transit affects everyone. So dedicated lanes on Bathurst and Dufferin were something that we had long campaigned on. Dedicated lanes mean that an entire street can only be used by a bus, or an entire lane on a street can only be used by a bus or a streetcar. The city has long promised implementing several of these since 2009, but have been dragging their feet since then. Last year, we finally saw 2 major arterials get transit lanes on Dufferin and Bathurst. These lanes are proven to be very effective, and overall reliability has increased dramatically. But then we need to take it to the next step, which is more dedicated transit lanes to allow even more people to take advantage of these improvements. Another big win, starting September 1st of this year, so in just 11 days, fare capping is going to be implemented in Toronto. Fare capping means that it makes transit more affordable. Instead of paying $156 on the first of the month, the same day that your rent is due, for a monthly pass, you'll now just have to tap until you hit the cap, and then every trip after that is free. This has been a long-standing capital campaign for TTCriders for several years and will finally begin on September 1st. There is a pledge as well to lower the cap from 47 to 40 in 2027. During this municipal election, we are going to be actively campaigning to get that cap lowered next year and to keep lowering it from there on. We won and are campaigning on better signage and wayfinding on the TTC. People often get lost on transit, and we hear this as a top accessibility concern from our accessibility committee. In 2025, we put up our own signs in a TTC subway station because we knew it could be so much better. Since the TTC is committed to developing a new wayfinding strategy to modernize the signage, next step is to work on making sure that they actually make that plan accessible. Another big win is safety on transit. It's always listed as a big barrier for people taking transit more often. Simply put, people just don't feel safe on transit and are choosing to take it less. We have to recognize that more police on transit isn't the answer. In fact, we hear again and again that a lot of people would feel less safe with more police on their vehicles. That's why we pushed for an approach to dealing with people who are in crisis that treats them with the compassion. This resulted in a pilot project to put Toronto Community Crisis Service workers on parts of the subway system. This is already showing results with violent incidents decreasing since the project started. The next steps and what we will be campaigning on in this election are implementing the program throughout the transit system so that even more people who need help can get it. Just in terms of this municipal election, why it's important. Municipal governments hold a lot of power over how the TTC operates because the city effectively owns the TTC. The mayor and city council can vote on a variety of things that impact transit service, affordability, accessibility, safety, and more. City councilors also sit on the TTC board, which directly oversees the organization. Since this election becomes important for transit because the candidates that we elect will have direct influence over the TTC. And in terms of accessibility in this election, again, amongst all the other things that I just mentioned that we're calling for, we absolutely have to preserve door-to-door Wheel-Trans service for all who need it, preserve and expand it. Accessibility must be a huge priority when developing the wayfinding strategy, and we're campaigning actively on better snow clearing because we've had every year we have the worst snowstorm that Toronto's ever seen, only followed by the next worst one the next year, and the snow clearing at transit stops has been lackluster. We have a bunch of things going on throughout the election, including distributing a survey to all candidates to ask them to commit to various transit priorities, including several accessibility priorities. We will
Andrew,
be yeah.
Andrew, 30 seconds.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
But right now, one thing that you can do to take action is to sign our transit pledge to commit to vote for transit, and we also have a survey at ttcriders.ca/2026 election that you can fill out to tell us your transit priorities. That's all I've got.
Great, Andrew. Thanks so much, and for all TTCriders is doing, really appreciate it. And now, folks, we have 20 minutes left, and we wanted to dedicate time for our breakout room work. So we're moving you in to breakout rooms so you could share your voice on the election platform calls. So with Dev's Tech Wizardry, we're going to be moving people into breakout rooms of 6 to 8 people. Each room will have a facilitator and a note taker. We'll have an ESL supported room, a breakout room with a note taker, and as well one with a captioner. Am I correct on that, Kim?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Dev is managing that. Yes.
So Dev's going to be doing that for us now, and see you in a room. So who wants to go first? You want to report on yours, your group? Who's going to report on your group, Kim?
August is going to report for us, actually. We have one solid call.
All right.
Am I reporting now?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
And
go ahead.
sorry, I was with Andrea and Ian in my group.
Okay. Okay, great. So we talked about a couple things: transit housing, what we settled on was a municipal standard for accessible housing, where landlords can apply for certifications, perhaps with some kind of tax break incentive or financial incentive as well to make those necessary upgrades.
So they would be like a certified accessible unit, and then they can use that to advertise.
Yeah, so renters would have some kind of notification system if an accessible rental is available. So it's easier for people in the city to find a rental unit that's accessible to them.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Next group. We just jump in, I guess.
Hi, this is Sri.
Hey, Sri.
So our group, I don't know that we voted on anything. We sort of shared what's our what our we feel strongly about currently, and so what came up, it was housing. Um, it was also different, sort of looking at um, some of the transit wins, specifically the monthly passes and those things, but if they fulfill all the needs that people have who might be struggling to meet monthly bills, or depending on how often they use transit. The other thing was around just TTC changing stops without any community consultation, which really disrupts people's ability to move around. And then we touched on healthcare a bit. I know it's a provincial thing, but really thinking about how this council can play a role in fighting against the privatization that's really impacting a lot of services.
Sri, I just want to check in. We're at 3 o'clock now. I want to check in with our access team. If you can stay for a couple more minutes. Interpreters.
I have about 5, but I have another commitment.
Okay.
Okay.
Joanne? Okay. And
yeah, same.
Sarah and Blue?
I just booked until 3, so
okay.
Yeah, just a few more minutes. Thanks.
Okay, so we just have a few more minutes. So do we want maybe one more group share, and then we can bring it over to Wendy just to bring us to a close?
Let me just say that our group reported and took notes. We can share the notes with you, Kim, to put together. So if someone else wants to speak, that's okay.
We'll be getting all the notes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks, John. Anyone else want to do a quick share of a key call to action?
I can share quickly on behalf of Group 6. So we talked mainly about transit, and we had 3 calls to action, or requests from the candidates. So the first one would be to increase the number and the availability of accessible on-demand taxi services. Number 2 is pledging to ensure that TTC remains in the hands of the city. And then number 3 would be to ask for substantial funding from both the provincial and the federal government to continue improving Wheel-Trans services, and specifically to ensuring that they're available to all folks with disabilities rather than only for folks with mobility-related disabilities. And our last bonus one was just asking candidates directly if their office is accessible, and if elected, would they commit to making their office accessible?
Thanks, Maddie.
Good one.
Should we move to Wendy bringing it home for us and kind of a highlight reflection, Wendy?
I don't think we have a lot of time for that, because I know that interpreters need to go. So I just wanted to say, we've heard some really important high-level questions, demands, perhaps. I've been watching the chat here where somebody said we shouldn't be questioning, we should be making demands of these things for our community. So accessible transit, affordable and accessible housing, poverty reduction, the expectation that disabled people can live in the community, be a part of our communities fully, with dignity, and live the lives that they want to live. These are the non-negotiables for us as a community, right? So we've talked about specific things to raise, to demand, to ask about with your candidates. We've heard about accessible voting, And we've heard about Social Planning Toronto's campaign as well. So I think we've come out of this with much more knowledge and I think more connection as a community on how to make sure that this election, we see our community represented and we see our needs at the end of the election in terms of our elected officials. So thank you, everybody. David, Kim, is there anything you want to add?
No, just like absolutely thank you to all our presenters today. Sean, thank you for joining for our first times. It was really an honor to have you here today. David?
Yeah, just that, we'll be campaigning right through until the election on October 26th. So you can reach us on a number of our platforms. We'll share that out when we send you an email with the content from the event, the link to the recording, but also resources related to the election. So yeah, so you'll get that within a few days. Thanks, everybody. Shout out to all of you for being here, showing up for
Thank
our
you so
community.
much.
Thank you.
Huge
So-
appreciation to our access team. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. And to the planners, thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye,
That's
everybody. Thanks for
everyone.
being here.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye.